Welcome to part 2 of 3. I have provocatively entitled this episode the Franken-School Monster in order to highlight how the system of education in the United States is a hodgepodge of cobbled together ideas that are having unintended harmful effects on children. I want to emphasize that the monstrosity of the system is embodied in policies, not in people. The harms being done by the system are caused by the interaction between policies and brains. The brains are doing what brains have always done, but the ways that the policies are guiding behaviors is causing harm. The best leverage for productive change is in the policy arena. Let's think about the Franken-School monster in terms of the Reading First program. First of all, it was a given that there were teachers who were charged with delivering the decoding skills to kids. But there was no recognition that the teachers were anything other than mechanical algorithms that possessed decoding skills. Teachers are not people, they are teacher bots. A teacher bot's job is to either get the decoding skill out of their brain into the instruction pump so that it could be reliably transferred to the brains of their students, or in some cases it was never expected to be in the heads in the first place. So they were just expected to operate the instructional mechanism without adding value. This is also known as teacher-proof curriculum. The instruction pump system is not capable of dealing with curious little boys and girls with unique personalities, so the instruction pump treats them as mechanical systems too. They are treated as kidbots. So the teacher bots operate the instruction pump, which then delivers those skills into the brains of the kidbots. In order to ensure that this miracle of immaculate transmission has actually occurred, the kidbots are periodically required to regurgitate their learning by performing on tests. The data from the tests are gathered up and analyzed by admin bots, who are responsible for adjusting the incentive pumps in order to manipulate teacher bots and kidbots into producing the proper patterns in the data. This is a nice feedback loop. It should be capable of producing whatever pattern of data the policymakers want. You will notice that in the mainstreams of media and education politics, there are only 6 things that are considered crucial to getting schools to work better. All it takes is better teachers, better instruction, better students, better tests, better administrators, or better incentives. And if learning worked like an algorithmic feedback process, then this would be a great plan. But learning doesn't work this way. So, no matter how big the budget is, investments relying on this model will fail to produce consistent improvements in learning. In fact, some of the Reading First programs actually did produce some positive results. That happened because sometimes there were some key factors of actual learning that accidentally got rolled into the delivery programs. For instance, if a particular program for decoding skills incidentally increased the quality of the network of caring relationships that students experience in school, then the kids subjected to that particular program will learn better. In part 3, it will become clear why that is the case. This is not an unprecedented situation. In the fight against communicable diseases by the medical profession, this same kind of thing happened when miasma theory was the generally accepted model. Back before what we know today as germ theory was properly articulated, there were lots of efforts to prevent death and cure disease that were only randomly effective. Given the large enough population, with numerous doctors trying whatever techniques they can think of to heal their patients, the laws of probability naturally predict that some of them will accidentally happen upon techniques that bolster healing. But the same odds predict that overall, there will be just as many techniques that cause more harm than good. The overall result remains statistically dismal. Even when Ignaz Semmelweis demonstrated in the late 1840s how hand washing could save lives, it made individual differences, but not large-scale statistical difference. The large-scale statistical difference was only made after the germ theory of disease became the paradigm that guided public policy. History provides 2 stories from the transformation of medicine in support of the view that policy is crucial to this kind of situation. First, the fight against epidemics of cholera in London between 1848 and 1874. And second, in the changes in medical practice between 1910 and the 1940s. I refer you to the books The Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson and Bad Medicine by David Wooten for more detail. In 1848 in London, authorities passed the Nuisances Removal and Communicable Disease Prevention Act. This was a law that mandated the elimination of open cesspools and the connection of the newly invented flush toilets to the stormwater system. The problem was that London stank, and over the previous 16 years, tens of thousands of people had died from epidemic outbreaks of cholera. Given that everyone believed in the miasma theory of disease, it was obvious that the bad smells were the cause of those epidemics. Quite a nuisance, those smells. The only problem was that the stormwater system thereafter effectively delivered immense amounts of raw sewage into the drinking water of over 2/3 of the city. The epidemic outbreak in 1854, 6 years later, was the worst ever in London and killed many more people than it otherwise would have if they'd just left things the way they were. But that outbreak also inspired Dr. John Snow to investigate one of the neighborhoods that was hit hardest by the outbreak with the help of a local clergyman, who was skeptical of Dr. Snow's radical ideas about the cause of the outbreak. Together, they discovered a pattern of data that logically disproved the miasma theory and eventually led to what we know now as germ theory. But the discovery was initially dismissed by authorities. They did not become convinced of Dr. Snow's ideas until the early 1860s, when they finally decided to invest in the creation of a separate sewer system that would ensure drinking water and raw sewage would not mix. There was another outbreak of cholera in 1874, which was alarming, since they had just made a huge investment in new infrastructure. But the outbreak was very limited and was eventually traced to 2 specific points in their new sewer system. The data, in fact, provided clear evidence that further supported the idea that some kind of particle in the water had to be the source of the disease, because those 2 points were places where the system was not operational. The pattern once again vindicated germs, not miasma. London has not had another outbreak of cholera since 1874. Over 100 years without an outbreak is the result of public policy guided by germ theory. But with the vindication of the germ theory and its final articulation about the same time, you might expect that medical practitioners would have immediately transformed their practices. But that's not how human beings work. By medical historian David Wooten's estimation, the adoption of germ theory was not in full force in medical practice for over 60 more years. In the United States, the transformation was finally initiated by the Flexner Report in 1910. The report lamented that amongst over 150 medical schools operating at the time, training in biological science, and therefore germ theory, was extremely rare. All medical approaches, homeopathy, osteopathy, allopathy, electrotherapy, etc., were all in equal standing, and most relied on an apprenticeship model with little or no scientific practice. The Flexner Report led to policy changes in the accreditation system for medical schools. The changes in accreditation, which included requirements for laboratory facilities, forced over half of the schools to close or merge by 1935. Those few that were left produced a new generation of doctors who were trained in scientific practice, not just told theories, and unlike their predecessors, readily adopted the antiseptic and aseptic procedures that germ theory requires as a foundation for effective medical practice. It took over 20 years for the policy changes inspired by the Flexner Report to bring medical practice in the United States into full alignment with germ theory. In education, I believe we're in the equivalent of the early 1860s. There are practices that have proven to be effective, but the policies and the common everyday understanding of the education process undermine the acceptance of those practices and perpetuate the policies that produce Franken-School monsters. We are just now realizing that a new paradigm is available, and it has not yet arrived in public policy. In Part 3, I will explain the growing mental maps theory of education that declares well-being to be the foundation, and how it could have prevented the reading first debacle.